Good evening. I'm Corvallis Advocate reporter Kara Nixon, and co-moderating with me tonight is publisher Steve Schultz. Welcome to tonight's CitySpeak Forum. This evening, our guests are Corval School District Superintendent Ryan Noss and School Board Chair Sami Al-Abdrabbuh. The school district announced last month that it would employ a hybrid model for reopening this year, and that for at least the first 6 weeks, classes would be conducted remotely. Tonight's discussion will include a look at what's guiding the district's decision-making during the pandemic and how students and teachers will be impacted in both the short term and the long term. Thank you to Sami and Ryan for taking the time from your busy schedules to participate this evening. These forums are presented by the Corvallis Advocate, which offers daily news online and in non-pandemic times, a twice-monthly deep dive print publication, along with live forums and storytelling nights. City Speaks are co-presented by City Club of Corvallis, a volunteer-run nonprofit organization seeking to present a diversity of viewpoints and constructive dialogue. Next week, City Speak will host Corvallis' new police chief, Nick Hurley. Steve?
Thank you, Kara. Each City Speak, I ask everybody to subscribe, and I want to say that a little bit differently tonight. You're about to consume content, and if you are not a subscriber, you are not taking care of the people that are behind the scenes creating that content, making it possible. There's quite a lot involved with these forums, much more than you see during the forum. In fact, if anything, the forum itself is really only kind of the tip of the iceberg. The majority of the iceberg is below water. You don't see it. Please do consider a subscription, taking care of the people that work for you to make sure that this discourse is available to you. It's $5 a month to subscribe. You get unlimited online access. You can get services over and above unlimited access, and you can donate over and above as well. All you have to do is go to our website. Subscribing is easy as it gets. Please do consider a subscription. Kara.
Thank you, Steve. In a few moments, we'll turn to audience questions. To ask a question while we are live, viewers are welcome to comment on the event's live post on our Facebook page, The Corvallis Advocate, or email us at cityspeak@corvallisadvocate.com. Again, that's cityspeak@corvallisadvocate.com. For now, we're going to start with introductory questions from our editorial board, and we'll start with Ryan. First, Ryan, could you briefly say how many students are in the Corvallis School District?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So we have approximately 6,700 students that attend our schools K through 12.
Okay, thank you. And then how long have you been in your current role?
This is actually the beginning of my 5th year as superintendent here in Corvallis. And I worked here 1 year previously, so I've been with the district for the last 6.
Okay. And then could you break down for us about how many students are in the district's elementary schools, middle schools, and high schools?
Yeah, so we have a pretty proportionate number grade by grade of those 6,700 students. So we have 2 comprehensive high schools with around 1,100 students or 1,000 students each, and College Hill that has about 150 students. Middle schools, we have Linus Pauling, which has close to 800 students, and we also have Sheldon, which is closer to 650. And then our elementary schools range between around approximately 350 and 400 students.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And then could you explain the exact plan for the first 6 weeks of school?
Yeah, so for our families, we have 2 options for the beginning of the school year. So for that first 6 weeks, we'll have some students that are participating in our Corvallis Online program, which is a year-long program focused on content that has been designed for specifically for online learning and for students that would be participating in that for the entire school year. Our other option is our hybrid model, which, as you stated, will start remotely for at least the 6 weeks, for 6 weeks of the school year. In that model, students will still be taking courses and having interactions synchronously with their teachers on a daily basis. And then we will continue to watch the metrics in terms of number of cases and make a decision late September, early October, a decision what to do after that October 19th date.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And then a question for Sami. So could the decision to move to a hybrid model be reevaluated at 6 weeks? And what factors would be considered in this reevaluation?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to be here. And I want to say one of the most important things that we learned about this pandemic, it's the virus leading the way on how we react and decide. We can be proactive by following the instructions that we hear about how to maintain physical distancing, and also make sure that we're washing our hands and taking care of each other in a way that will lower the spread of the virus. After the 6 weeks, the board trusts Superintendent Noss in evaluating the situation and the conditions. And on that, I would like to leave it to Ryan to really comment on details on it, but I want to really share with the community something very important on this regard. We work in a sphere of control of many things we have control over, which is how we can adapt and change the programming to make sure we can educate our children. We can't control the virus as individuals or as a school district, other than the education that we do to really minimize the spread. But as a community, we can do the work together. So in 6 weeks, and this is practical, in 6 weeks, we could have a very low spread of the virus. Another factor that plays a huge role here is that we work within the guidance and the requirements that are stated by the governor, and also by in consultation with ODE and OHA. So that's another factor that will play a role. So definitely we support Superintendent Noss in terms of the leadership on deciding what's safest in 6 weeks.
Okay,
and I don't know, Ryan, if you want to add to that.
Yeah, thanks, Sami. I think, the quote Sami alluded to by Dr. Fauci, which says, we don't set the timeline, the virus sets the timeline. And so we've kept that in mind, as well as being conservative in our decision making. We want to make sure that families have predictability where we can provide that. So making early announcements allows additional time for families to prepare for the start of the school year, and we'll continue to do the same thing. There's guidance from the governor related to reopening, and we watch the metrics both in our county and also at the state level to make decisions about our ability to reopen. Again, I think the question I get most often has been around the decision around reopening. And I think that, again, I just want to remind the community that there's some metrics set by the governor, and at the same time, we've been conservative in our decisions because safety and security are their primary responsibility for our kids. And so we want to make sure that that is accounted for in the decisions that we continue to make throughout the school year.
Okay, thank you. And then I'll ask this question to both of you, but I'll start with Sami. From your view as board chair, what are the district's priorities for these next 3 to 6 months?
Absolutely. Very good question. I think one of the things we discussed with Ryan throughout the board meetings is the priorities that we need to really pay attention to, maintaining the educational continuity and instructional hours for our students. So they need to really continue to learn and get the learning that they need. Also, we need to do it safely. So their safety and is important. Another thing is to keep our teachers and staff involved and engaged, and maintain our support for them in this difficult time, and empower them with the tools that they need to really carry out this mission also safely. And those are really the short term. I would say short term, even though we're thinking 6 months. That's really a lot to think about. But one thing I want to say, since you asked about the board perspective, and I would like to ask Sam to share the screen on the documents I shared previously, the board goals that we worked on 2 years ago, and they inform our work. And Sam, if you don't mind, share on the screen right now the board goals documents. You will see there are 5 destinations that we shared with the superintendent, and we worked collaboratively with the community, school community, to set those goals. And we say we need to get there. Those are 5 years goals, long term. And those 5 destinations, while we are navigating very difficult time right now, just think about it as a storm. And we have a captain, which is Superintendent Noss, and we have a qualified team to steer the ship. We say we want to go to those 5 destinations no matter what. Students' achievements. We want to make sure our students can read to grade level and can attain the knowledge that they need. And we have specified very important goals there. The second thing is equitable systems. The pandemic is exacerbating the achievement gap between those students who have been fortunate and privileged before and those who are not. And we want to make sure that as we adapt, we continue to be committed to equity, racial equity, and all aspects of equity. But most importantly, make sure that we're paying attention to racial justice and we're intentional about it. And the board has expressed a huge interest in making sure that we're not only equitable, but we're intentional about racial equity, and we're anti-racist in how we build systems and transform systems. The third goal is making sure that our students are healthy, their health and wellness is maintained, and also is our staff. So we attend to the mental and physical health and we support them. And this goal continues to be important throughout the pandemic. The fourth one, which is a favorite of mine, they're all like my favorites, but real world learning. And real world learning meaning our students be ready to engage with real world learning opportunities during their school and prepare them when they graduate to be ready for the next thing that they will explore. And the real world we live right now is changing rapidly. We don't know what industries will disappear, what ones will show up. We want to continue to have that North Star for our children, that you will continue to be ready for the job market and for the life challenges. The fifth one is something, a destination that's tangible, and you can see it when you drive around Corvallis. It's the long-range facilities, making sure our schools buildings are equipped to be ready to welcome our students back. And we're following through with the bond promise, where we promised the community to rebuild 2 schools and to maintain the rest of them and upgrade them to the needs of our students as they evolve. So these 5 goals continue to be our priority, and we are focused on accomplishing them. While we have short-term challenges and through the pandemic, programmatically and operationally, things are changing, but we're focused on those things. We want to make sure we're always equitable. And most importantly, the community and the parents continue to be engaged in this important work.
Thank you. And then Ryan, did you have anything to add about that from your perspective as superintendent?
Sure. So for the first 6 weeks, I think a couple of pieces are really important to keep in mind. One of them is around student safety. So again, making conservative decisions about bringing students back on campus. Also, one of the things that I think is important for families to know and to hear is that the instruction will look different this fall than it did last spring. We closed quickly based on the number of cases of the virus. And so we've had the summertime to continue to work to think about what school is going to look like for this year. So there'll be more synchronous opportunities to work directly with teachers in learning content. There'll be attendance requirements. There'll be grades. Those pieces will be consistent across our levels. And also recognizing that we have students that have had limited access to some services that we provide, mental health supports, also access to just to being with our teachers and being with our staff, those folks that they have strong relationships with, to bring that back and to continue to build that relationship piece. It's different when you're starting a new school year online or in distance learning than it is when you start the school year with the teacher or in the middle of the school year. The teacher, you've been in the classroom, and now you go home. And so really building those relationships over that first 6 weeks is going to be really vital as we think about the long term of the school year. So those are a couple of things I'd add to the board goal areas. There is articulation and connection to those, I think, but I think there are a couple of important areas to call out.
Thank you. And then likewise, I'll ask you first, Ryan, what will the priorities be after the first 3 to 6 months?
Honestly, I don't know that those will change. I think the goals will be the same. First, the board goals are 5-year goals, so they're areas that will continue to advance. Within those, when you think about what's happening in classrooms in this format, maintaining and continuing to build those relationships, also to enhance learning, and finally to make sure that if there are limitations to access, that we're working really hard to eliminate those barriers. So I think those things will still be in place. I think those things are easier to accomplish when you're face-to-face in a school. At the same time, those are areas that we really feel are important. We have to continue to strive to meet those objectives in this format.
Okay. And then Sammy, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, actually, Ryan said it's really well, but when he shared those things, I got reminded by two important aspects here. The first one, the overwhelming support of the community. It truly takes a village, and now more than ever, it takes a village to raise a child. And the families who are sacrificing from so many aspects to make sure they're attending to their kids and also to their neighbors' kids and making sure everyone is taking care of each other. That's overwhelming, and I'm so humbled and proud to be part of this community. I want to also highlight the nonprofit organizations that are stepping up to the needs of the community and our children. And noteworthy is the Corvallis Schools Foundation. If someone is listening to us and say, how can I help with all of these challenges? And we know schools are underfunded, and we're doing more with truly less money, or we need more money to do the work that we're doing, and we're being very flexible and creative. But the foundation is a great stakeholder in making sure we're investing the resources where they are needed most. And the collaboration with them has been phenomenal, and I really appreciate the coordination between our board and the foundation board of trustees, and also between Ryan and Leaf, their executive director. So I encourage anyone from the community, if you have something to chip in, I would say please chip in for the Corvallis Schools Foundation. They're helping the school district with important work, sheltering kids, giving them the food and the supplies they need, and beyond. There are so many educational outcomes as well has been impacted by the foundation. Another thing I want to say, as a board member, I am really proud of how our district is doing this work. Even though many of the decisions are not the best thing that we wish for, but it's the best thing that we can do. But something I really appreciate in Ryan is that he's working as much as possible to give predictability for the community. So you would hear about other school districts who changed their plans, and I empathize with the challenges that they're navigating and the community demand about going one way or the other. But they had to change their plans based on the virus changes. So being conservative in the planning and be as predictable as possible. There will be always surprises, and we will see so many surprises because of the nature of a crisis. There's always changing things. But I really appreciate the work of the district, giving the families as much predictability and more time to plan for the school year and the beginning of the school year. That's something parents are appreciating.
Okay, thank you. I'm now going to move to some questions about how Corvallis schools are going to be supporting their diverse families in our district. So first of all, I'll start with Sami. How is the Corvallis School District during remote learning supporting special education students?
Absolutely. That's a question Ryan can answer its best, but I can refer you to the goals that we have. We have a commitment for our students, especially special education students who have special needs and unique needs. And some, if not many, are vulnerable due to the nature of the virus. So we need to make sure that we continue our support for them and give them the resources and the tools that they need. At the same time, without jeopardizing their health and safety. And I really appreciate community members who are reaching out either to the board or their school and saying, what are you going to do? And maybe Ryan could highlight some of those aspects.
Okay. Ryan, did you want to?
Yeah, sure. So one of the things that I think is true for our students with disabilities is that they have individualized education plans that are developed between the family and the school. And I think this is one of those times when we think about those individualized education plans as being really individualized, because as we think about this distance learning piece, what aspects of that plan and of the system and structure are working for those students, and which do we need to modify and adjust Our case managers at our schools, who are our special education teachers, will be reaching out to families and talking about those plans for the year and those individualized aspects and making modifications to really support those kids. So I feel like we have a plan in place to make that family connection and to think about those individualized needs, and then how do we do our best to meet them, understanding the nuance of distance learning.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And then Ryan, again, how will the Corval School District be supporting students who rely on school meals for nutritional sustainment?
Yeah, so a couple things I'd say there. The first is that piggybacking on what Sami said about our foundation, there has been just really strong support from our community ever since since schools closed in March to in-person learning, where donations have been made, and so we've been able to support not just our students but families through some food boxes, looking at some needs around access to internet, some concerns that some of our families have around paying some of their utilities. So we've been able to really help in those areas for some of our families. The other thing that we've done has been to have a number of food sites where students could pick up breakfast, lunch, and dinner 5 days a week, all at one time. And so that's been one of the things that's happened during the summer. Even though we will still be not back in school, we'll be continuing to provide meals through our food program at our schools. So that's something that will continue even though school has started and we're continuing on in distance learning. So that's a really important piece for us to have in place and for our families to know about. So I appreciate that question.
All right.
And if I may add to that, one of the aspects that I've been fortunate to witness is the interest and collaborative work from elected officials across the board on really realizing this is going to be difficult. Our schools has been responsible and continue to be on so many aspects for our children's growth, their educational needs, their nutritional needs, and beyond. So I really appreciate the interest from our state legislator and here in Corvallis, Representative Rayfield and Senator Sarah Geltzer, and also on federal level, I've been in a joint meeting between OSBA, Oregon School Board Association, Caucus of Color, and Legislative Policy Committee with Congresswoman Susan Bonamici, who's interested in education. And we were sharing the challenges the school districts, rural and others that are facing and going through. One of the things I want to highlight is that internet accessibility and broadband accessibility is a big challenge. And I tell people, maybe right now for me, I'm privileged because you can listen to me flawlessly, and it's not, we don't have any challenges in the connection. But for so many families, there is this challenge. And imagine if the Interstate 5, I-5 disappears all of a sudden, how that will devastate communities all the way between Seattle and San Diego, cities and small towns, because we rely on it. Broadband has the same effect in our daily life for our families, where some families don't have access to that backbone, a resource for their education, for business opportunities, and for healthcare. And there are so much interaction between all of those needs. And we need to really continue to talking with elected officials, local, state, and federal, and find out creative solutions, how we can support each other and how our schools continue to be funded and supported to do the work that they're doing in terms of education, and also working on the basic needs for our students that we've been working on for a long time.
Thank you. That was actually my next question, was about internet access. So Ryan, did you want to speak on that, about supporting families who don't have internet access or access to devices?
Yeah, so one of the things I think we're really fortunate to have here in Corvallis is that we have had devices, individual devices for our students. So with our 6,700 students, we have 6,700 devices, plus a few. And so we've been able to provide students with access to devices since March. And we've also been able to support families who have limitations in terms of internet access. So we've done that a couple of ways. One of those ways has been to purchased hotspots that families have been able to use for teaching and learning purposes. And then we've also expanded the signal at several of our schools so that families could also access Wi-Fi from our parking lots. Again, through our system, students who show up at those sites, they're logged on from their devices and are able to access the content. And so we looked at that geographically. So Mountain View is an example of a school that has that access, and at the other side of town, Lincoln has that as well, and Linus Pauling in the middle. So we've looked at ways to both support families, individual families, and then also sort of community-wide supports in that area. And that's another piece that we'll continue to focus on throughout the school year and the pandemic, making sure that students have access to the curriculum through these channels, because I agree with Sami, access to broadband is something that is, it's similar to many other infrastructures that we have. And at this day and age, it's something that really is vital for all of our families. So again, we've really looked at what are a couple of different ways and different avenues to support families in that regard.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And then lastly, there's about 200 homeless students at attending Corval School District last time we looked. How will Corval School District be supporting homeless students and their families?
So I'll
right.
go first.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, sounds fine. I'm happy to go first. So we have continued to support those students throughout the summer. So we have several liaisons that work between our schools and our families that are navigating poverty or homeless. And so those liaisons have strong relationships with those families and those students, and have continued to reach out to provide resources throughout the summer. And that's a piece that will continue. Also at the school level, each of our schools has a team that looks at the needs of the students that attend that school. And so in that same instance, our school counselors and principals and teachers and mental health therapists are all talking about those students and ways to provide ongoing support. We look at levels of need and really focus our resources where the greatest needs are. And so that's a structure that we've had in place for a long time that, again, is really important right now. That's one of the things that I feel proud about, is that a number of structures and systems that we've had developed for some time are really helping us out right now. So the example of access to those devices, having enough devices for kids to have access in school is important, but now that kids are in remote learning or distance learning, it's even more important. And so we've been able to capitalize on some of those decisions made in the past to really support our kids at this juncture, and we'll be able to do that throughout the school year because of those pieces in place.
Thank you. Sami, do you have anything to add?
Is there anything I can add to that? He's making our job much easier. I would say, yeah, I have one thing to add. My eyes are getting teared up because, as Ryan mentions this, stories that I hear from community members or from the presentations of the Corval Schools Foundation comes to mind, and those stories really touch my heart. It's hard just to imagine you're homeless or doubled up or having housing insecurity, and think that you can succeed and prosper. But we're committed to do that. We're committed to give the promise of public education to provide the opportunity for our kids to grow, regardless of those unfortunate circumstances that they might be in. And on that, I want to say, yes, this happens in Corvallis, happens in so many communities. And if you want to support, go to the Corvallis Public Foundation and chip in. They're helping us doing this important work. And I want to say, Ryan, thank you, and thank you for the team. I know they're going above and beyond, and that's our duty. We have to make sure not to give up on any one of our students, no matter what. And thank you for the district for doing this good work.
Thank you. We'll now turn to audience questions. Steve?
Thank you, Kara. I want to remind viewers that you've got a couple of ways to ask questions during this forum. One, you could hit our live feed on Facebook and ask a question there. You can also email us, CitySpeak@corvallisadvocate.com. That's CitySpeak@corvallisadvocate.com. First question, and I'm going to go to Ryan first on this one. What's being done in terms of attendance? Right now, people are going to be learning remotely. What's being done about attendance?
So generally speaking, daily attendance is continues to be a requirement of school. This year, we will be having in the hybrid model, there'll be synchronous learning daily. So checking in with kids with each one of their courses. So it's important that students are there. It's important that students are engaged in their learning. So in terms of attendance, it's still a key component of showing up and being part of the process of learning. That doesn't change in this model for us. At the same time, one of the things we'll continue to do is when students aren't attending, we'll continue to reach out to families to better understand why. In this instance, we know that there are new factors and new challenges that our families are facing in the middle of a pandemic, and so we'll understand that and we'll recognize that, and at the same time, we'll be asking, what does it take to re-engage with all of our students? So again, just for families to know, attendance is a requirement, and at the same time, when issues around the pandemic are prohibitive, we're going to work with families to support them and to support kids to be there.
Okay, and then what programs are you folks going to be using to interact with students? Is it going to be a Zoom program? Is it going to be Google Hang? What are you going to be using?
Yeah, so it varies by level, but in grades 6 through 12, we have adopted Canvas as our learning management system. Also, students will be accessing through Zoom. At our younger levels, we'll be using Google Classroom, and also Seesaw, which is another learning management system for our younger students. So we have a couple of different products based on level developmentally, and also just sort of in terms of the skills that students need to navigate those, but we'll have that in place for all of our kids.
And I swear this must come from somebody who's been at the middle school level. This is who you hear this from. So what about tardies? What's going to happen when a student has a problem? In fact, we have this for editorial meetings. Logging on is not always smooth for people, depending on what's going on with that connection. What happens if they're tardy because they can't get logged on?
We recognize that we're in the middle of a pandemic, and so there is going to be some grace that we have to give one another. And all of these pieces, there'll be grace that our staff needs because they're doing, taking on this Herculean effort to teach in a way they never anticipated teaching. Our kids will be accessing content in a way that they aren't as familiar with. And so I think that we'll be working with students, and we'll be recognizing some of those pieces that come up for them. We know that for some of our students, even having the camera on might present something of a barrier depending on living situation or some other factors. And so we just have to give each other grace right now. And I think that's another message that I think is really important to share with our community.
Okay, and then within the context of everybody's going to be online, the concern expressed here was about cyberbullying. Are you folks having a concern along those lines, and are there things in place to handle that? And either Sami or Ryan or both could weigh in on that. Sami, I feel like I'll go to you first.
All right, I'll start real quick, but I think Ryan can work in detail there. Our board members expressed their interest in making sure our policies are solid in terms of anti-bullying, and I really appreciate the work of the district, and the direction is to have a restorative justice approach to things like that. So on a policy level, we have a commitment of board members expressing interest on talking about this issue and navigating it. Another thing that I want to really highlight that our school district is compliant with FERPA, the federal acts that protects children throughout technology. And I think that's the bare minimum. There have to be some intentional work on making sure how our students can learn and empathize with each other and understand what it means to experience such unfortunate acts. As a person who have been subject to bullying and even more physical and verbal when I was a child, I think, and a teenager, I think it's something that's of a high priority. And I really appreciate the commitment of the district working on this. I'll let Ryan speak to it in more detail.
Yeah, and then, and in continuing that question, when you say restorative justice, that means different things to different people. What are the specifics, Ryan?
So
you
for
see
us,
you see some bullying. Let's say it's middle school or high school. What do you do?
So I think that there are a number of different things that you can do in those situations. As the teacher working to build a climate in that classroom where students feel known and valued, it starts with building those relationships of trust and respect. So one of the pieces that will be part of those lessons, what really at our elementary schools, we're going to start the day with caring school community, which is a piece that really talks about how to build those relationships of trust and respect in the classroom. So I think that generally speaking, for the whole, there's some expectations about being taught about what those rules are, what those expectations are going to be specifically in this format that looks different. So I think that you start with clear expectations for everyone. And then if incidents arise, then those incidents are dealt with those individual students one-on-one. And I think the other piece about having built those relationships of trust and respect in classrooms is that students feel comfortable letting the teacher know that that's going on. There are aspects of this format that make that more difficult for the teacher to be able to be supervising the classroom. Especially as you think about breakout groups and some of those things that will happen at older levels. So we're going to need to make sure that kids feel that trust with the staff to be able to bring those things forward so they can be dealt with. The other thing is that these are still classrooms. And so our school leaders and school administrators will still be visiting the classes, rotating through them, meeting with small groups of students. So I think that in some ways, this is a different format. In other ways, it's a similar format to what we've done in the past. So again, maintaining clear expectations for students through teaching and support. And then when those things, if those things don't work, that there's a system in place for students to report so teachers and principals can follow through. So I think that that's a real kind of structured way of looking at this format, similarities between what we have in a normal school year, and also recognizing this is a bit different.
All right, thank you, Ryan. And then in a moment, I will be asking you some questions about vegetarians and school lunches. But for the moment, I'm going to go back to Kara, who's got a question from a viewer that's been emailed.
So there has been some concern about childcare with remote learning, considering that a lot of families are two-income households or single-parent households. This viewer wants to know what it would take for the school board to potentially direct some of their school district contingency funds to help organizations like the Boys and Girls Club with the continuation of providing childcare, or if there's other ways that the school district will be helping with that childcare issue. Ryan, if you want, or Sami, if you want to start.
I'll start and maybe Ryan can fill in the gaps there. I think one of the biggest challenges that this is hard. This is hard on every single parent, especially those single parents who are making sacrifices already and they need to navigate through those situations. Fortunately or unfortunately, the school system has been equipped and have been providing many things, including education and childcare for 7 hours a day, 5 times a week. And with the resources we have right now, this is something that's not within the reach of the Corval School District. And I hear that there is a mention of the contingency funds. Contingency funds and reserves are up to the school board. They can decide if they need to be spent somewhere. But we have to be careful when we touch them. Those are for the rainiest of the rainiest of the rainiest of the days. And we are expecting the next biennium, which is not at the end of this year, 2 years from now, that we will have a huge deficit on the state budget, which means we need to be ready to buckle up if necessary, and to continue having our staff, the resources with our staff and teachers, the support that they need to teach our students and to keep our business in terms of educating our children. We need to be very careful in making those decisions, and we need to be mindful about it. That does not mean that we're hands off from this. The school district has been working collaboratively with community partners, and maybe Ryan can highlight some of that. Personally, in my personal capacity, I've been talking with community partners, and there is a Facebook group that's getting started. It's called Corvallis Families Cooperative. And it's a place for people to share resources with each other and say, this is what the Boys and Girls Club is doing. This is what this business is doing. This is what we're doing in our household. And by the way, if you want to have a pod, let's be mindful about some of the considerations that we need to care about in terms of not letting some children out of our pod unintentionally in a way that will disadvantage them, just because of who I'm comfortable with as a parent, and forget about my child friends and who they are with. So we want to be inclusive and equitable in those approaches. Another aspect is how can we attend to the health and safety of our children. So I believe there is a very important role for the community to come together on this very, very challenging situation. And I know Benton County Foundation is organizing a discussion with community partners, governmental agencies across several counties to really understand what's the situation and what can we do to maximize the efforts and the resources. There are so many childcare deserts. You can say the whole nation is a childcare desert, and Corvallis is not an exception. So I hear the parents with the concern that they mentioned, and I wish we can solve the problem. But if I say, and this is not my decision, it will be the board decision, but let's say if the board says, in my view, if the board says, let's put a contingency fund to it, that means it's not going to be sustainable. And also we might be jeopardizing the essential business that the school district is doing for years to come.
Thank you. And then Ryan, did you want to speak on that as well?
Yeah, I think Sami did a really nice job of summarizing where we're at as a community. And we did a lot of research and searching over the summer for additional resources or opportunities to provide childcare. What we realized is that it will take sort of an overall community approach to that piece. And so we focused on the educational component. And we know that within our resources that we're not able to achieve childcare and the educational system sort of in tandem right now. And so we focus on that educational component. So again, I would just reiterate what Sami has said. We know that that's a challenge for families, and we know, we recognize that. And at the same time, we have to focus on that educational component. And that's what we're going to be doing this fall.
Thank you.
Yeah, and if you may allow me, I want to say this is hard, and I know some people are in a very hard situation. One of my friends is a single mom, and her child is an elementary school level, and she needs to work, and she needs to make sure that she's attending to her child needs, social, academic, and also childcare. So it is hard, and not everybody have time, not everybody have money, and not everybody have resources. So my request for the community members is to think creatively on a block level, or every few doors next to each other, is to have this conversation. What can you provide, not only for my child, but also what can I provide for my neighbor? Because if I have extra time, maybe someone else have extra money, and maybe one of us today does not have the time or the money, but one day we'll be able to pay it forward. So we need to really work as a village and give what we can to really creatively solve this problem. But it's a very big challenge.
Thank you. Steve?
Yeah, when you say that you're working with community partners, who are some of those partners, Sami?
So far, I have a couple of individuals who are interested in getting together, and one of them is a small business owner from the the little gym. And there are a couple of folks also who are interested in finding out how they can help out. So I would say it's really organic work. There's no organization under that umbrella. And just to be very clear, this is in my personal capacity. The Facebook group is called Corvallis Families Cooperative. And the intention of it is to have the conversation there, and people know what's available and what's not available, and also what are the guidelines. So for people to really connect with each other. And if someone is interested in helping out, sharing information or sharing resources, and say, here's what I can help with, please go ahead and share those information with others. So it's just a platform for people to really connect with each other, especially parents and families who need to work on the several issues. It's not necessarily childcare only. It's all aspects of how can we care for each other. And I was really inspired by Katie for a similar work for small businesses. When small businesses started closing up, she created a similar Facebook group where small businesses were able to coordinate and talk to each other and say, here's a grant that's available, and here's another opportunity that's available. So I believe we need to facilitate that conversation. And if someone is interested with providing a resource or sharing what they're doing or how they can help their small neighborhood or pod, let's talk there.
Right, and then I guess the other question that kind of there's something called ESSER funds or something like that. I don't know what those are. Is any of that going to get directed out to organizations like the Boys and Girls Club at all? Ryan,
Yeah, so those are so sort of through that COVID stimulus or relief funds. There were some resources that came to school districts and then go on to both our charter schools, and some of those dollars going to the private schools in our community. And so far those services, those resources have been used for things like some of our PPE that we will need in cases of reopening. Some of it has allowed us to put into place things like Canvas and some of our distance learning softwares. So it's been really utilized fully in the ways that allow us to modify and shift what we're doing for this upcoming school year. So those funds have all really been allocated based on the criteria that came from the Department of Education, as well as some of those areas that we know we have to invest in because they were areas that we hadn't anticipated investing in prior to having a pandemic.
Okay, and then I guess that answers the question as to funds going to Boys and Girls Club. The answer is essentially not really, no.
Not those funds.
Yeah, okay. Does the district have anything they can do to help out the Boys and Girls Club? Apparently, every child that they're providing care for costs them money at this point.
Yeah, so at this point, we have talked to them about doing some sorts of supports around the educational piece. So as an example, Byron Bethards, who's leading our Corvallis Online, will be meeting with staff and talking about some of those components of making sure that kids are able to access in that way. So it's more sort of those kinds of services rather than financial assistance.
Now let me go ahead and get to the lunch question. And then, Kara, there's another question by email for after. And then the other question is this. So this parent they're a vegetarian family. The kids are on a free lunch program. Apparently, the only entree available is PB&J. And I think a steady diet of anything every day is liable to bore any palate. And this is the parent's concern that some of the other stuff in the lunch may be okay. It's really a two-part question. Why only PB&J as an entree? And for some reason, apparently, they are not permitted to get both the free lunch for the stuff around the PB&J, the kind of side courses, if you will, and then maybe bring their own entree to supplement. and why is that the case? And Ryan, I'm going to go to you with this one.
So for clarity, is that right now during the pandemic, or is that during the school year? Because it sounds like bringing an entree would be during the school year rather than during the pandemic. So can
Right.
you clarify that one for me?
It's not in the question. It's
Oh,
in
okay.
yeah.
Yeah. So when we're
What would happen over the school year?
Yeah, during the school year, we tried to provide a variety of options for kids beyond a PB&J. Our food service has actually worked really hard over the last couple of years to expand the options for kids, understanding cultural components as well, in terms of what families tend to eat and feel comfortable and accustomed to eating. So we've worked really hard at that. Also
So what are
mentioned
some of the other vegetarian options? Do you know?
off the top of my head, I can look it up in our calendar, but I don't know like right off the top of my head what those other options are. I know
Right.
there are other options, but I'm not exactly sure. When I was out delivering or helping with lunches, even over the pandemic and handing them out, we were doing grilled cheese that day. So that would be another example that I ran into when I was helping to hand out lunches.
And then the other question would be is, okay, now we're in pandemic time. What's being done to help families that are on free lunch have some variety for the kids that need that meal?
Yeah. So we've been providing breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So 3 different meals. In terms of variety amongst the days, I don't know that I don't have the specifics on how often those meals change over. Um, I do know that one of the things I took note of is that as families were coming up to pick up meals, that the people who work in food service tended to know those families, tended to know their dietary restrictions, and were making modifications and adjustments to those meals as they were handing them out. So in terms of that piece, I know that our staff tend to know the families as they've been working with them over the summer, and are trying to prep those meals right as they're coming up. So I saw that happen. Again, in terms of the rotation, how frequently and how often, I don't know that information, but I do know that those menus are posted.
I just got help from a friend, and Vice Chair Sarah McDonald said bean burrito as well as one of the additional ones.
Thanks, Sami.
Thank you, Sarah.
Okay, and then Kara, I'm going to go to you with the emailed question from that viewer.
Okay. So for Ryan, what can you talk about what a typical school day would look like for somebody who's in elementary school during the 6 weeks of remote learning? And then as a follow-up, can you also speak to parents' concerns about computer screen time for kids?
So at the elementary level, we sent out sort of a broad schedule. I believe it was the beginning of last week that talked more about the 8:30 to 1:30 sort of window of time. And we had some questions about that's a long time to be in front of a screen, some of those considerations. And so really that is looking at the whole elementary spectrum and looking at kids who are 10 and in 5th grade and students that are 5 and in kindergarten. And that's going to vary based on those levels. It's also, so when you ask the question, it's really about those primary grades and those intermediate grades, which I think of as K3 and 4, 5. It's going to look a little different. Some of that time is going to be whole group where we're all meeting together. I shared about the caring classroom piece or caring schools community piece earlier on. And so there'll be some work that happens as a group. And there'll also be some time when small groups of kids are meeting with the teacher for additional support. And so those days are going to look a little different in terms of timing, but we wanted to provide an overall window and general kind of time of day. And then more specifics are going to be coming out near the end of this week based on the grade levels themselves. So some of it will be with the teacher as a group. Some of it will be with small groups. Some of it will be some independent work that teachers are then checking in with students on. So that's it's gonna vary a little bit. But again, the intention is that there is more time synchronously with the teacher, more support that way, and also with the classmates, because again, it's a new group of kids, it's a new teacher, and we need to start right out of the gate working on building those relationships as a community.
Thank you. And then
Yeah.
Sami, did you have anything to add to that?
No, I'm good.
All right. Thank you. Steve?
Thank you, Kara. And then, I'm going to get to a question in a moment. I want to remind viewers, if you'd like to ask a question, we have a little more than another half hour. You can submit the question either through the live feed post on our Facebook page or at CitySpeak at corvallisadvocate.com. That's CitySpeak at corvallisadvocate.com. Sami, this one is directed to you, and I've been dreading asking it, but I have to.
Bring it on.
Well, the economy is there's going to be some ramifications to the economy. I don't know if anybody actually knows what they're going to be yet. But is a district getting any sense of what to anticipate in terms of future financial constraint from Salem and other monies that come in from the Fed? It's a big subject. I don't even know where to start. And you may not yet either.
Yeah, I would say short answer, we don't know. A little bit longer answer is I'm glad we have our priorities clear and our goals clear, because no matter how the pie, not no matter, but as much as the pie could go shrink or expand in terms of support for school districts, local school districts, including ours, when you have your priorities clear, you're able to make sure to know where to focus your investments and focus your work and get the maximum impact for the school board goals in terms of achieving equity in students' achievement and health outcomes in real world learning, and making sure our schools are up to standard in serving our students and keeping them safe. So that's what I would say. I would say I've been in continuous talks with our representative, Dan Rayfield, a great friend of mine. And also we are fortunate here in Corvallis because he is the co-chair who writes the budget from the legislative side. And I think a few things I learned from the conversations with him and from what Salem is communicating is that we need to be ready for the worst. And we need to make sure that next biennium will be challenging, probably more challenging than now. So we're thinking about economical challenges in the 2021-22 years and maybe beyond. So that means we have to stay focused on our priorities and make sure we don't overspend right now, so we end up in a really difficult situation. Historically, and this is before my time, historically the Corvallis School District has been fiscally conservative and responsible in a way where we have the reserves and contingency funds for the rainiest and the rainiest of the days, the most challenging days. And I worried when I say this. We have to be ready for the worst, and we have to be ready that economically things will get harder. And if they don't, great. And let's hope for that. Let's work toward that. But let's plan for the worst case scenario. And historically, with the recession, the school board and the school district went through some challenges, but not as much as other districts that were not planning for such challenges like the recession that we face in the past decade. Now, federally, I will get political here, and I wanted to disclose that I'm talking in my personal capacity, not necessarily as a spokesperson on behalf of the chair of the school board. We want a partner in our federal government, and I do appreciate our Congressman DeFazio and the Oregon delegation. They know what it means for us to support our schools, our children, and make sure while we're navigating this difficult time. And you heard Ryan, the investments and the work they're doing everything they can do. Our teachers and admin have been doing tremendous job. And if any one of them is listening to me right now, thank you. You're doing amazing job, terrific job, and you're doing miracles. So our Oregon delegation really respects that, appreciates that, and they know public education is here to stay, and we have to continue investing in it. And there are a couple of bills that are waiting in the Senate, and if they pass, local districts will get the support they need. When I hear, and again, this is personal opinion, when I hear someone from the federal government say, if you don't open the schools, no matter what, fully 5 times a day, and I don't care about what happens for your children or your teachers and admin, if you don't do it, I'm going to cut the funding. And you know what they mean by that when the White House says that? They talk about 10% of the budget that they cannot control. It's actually congressionally controlled by Congress, so they need congressional approval. And that 10% of the budget usually goes for the most vulnerable students, our students who are experiencing poverty, our students with special needs. So to really bring the point home, we need a partner in the federal government who appreciates the difficult situation we're in. And they know if you invest in public education right now, it will pay dividends so much in the next few years in terms of economy, in terms of students' outcomes, health outcomes for our students and their families. So it is challenging, and we're having those productive
along those
discussions.
lines that you're speaking to the future.
Mhm.
You know, and this I'll take a moderator's prerogative for a moment, and I'm only going to give you 60 seconds each on this because we are starting to get another round of viewer questions. Education seems like an imperative. One would think that with where the country is now in terms of understanding just the scientific method, that, well, of course, the advice about masks was one thing in the beginning and it changed. And there's been criticism that that advice changed. Although, if you take a couple science classes and they really are meaningful for you, you know the scientific method means the information is uncovered as you proceed. Yeah? And just, I guess, speaking for a moment to the future of education, and prior Secretary Arnie Duncan, when he was in charge of the Chicago schools, talked about you can tell who's going to be involved in a violent crime based on their education level. And so in his mind, education was life or death. The people that are educated are just less likely to die in a violent crime and less likely to commit one. That's Arnie Duncan, prior education secretary. We see in the pandemic that health, understanding the science is essential to the public good. And we see that we have a justice system that is responsive to criminality in a particular way. Could you speak to what is required in the education system that is not being discussed along these lines? And it's a longer question in a way that I'm giving you time for. Ryan, I'm actually going to start with you because I think you're deeply thoughtful about some of these things. That could just be a suspicion. I don't have anything to back that up.
I guess it just comes down to my answer, right?
Yeah.
So I think that there was a lot in that question, and I think that when I think about public education and what it provides, I do agree that it provides an opportunity for students to learn and to have future opportunity. I also recognize that it is not proportionate. I understand that there's kids that based on areas around economics, about race, about disability, that access is not the same, and that it's really that public education is about providing access where and resources where needed, so that all students have those opportunities. And so in our district, we have conversations about those things because they're really vital for us to be able to successfully support our kids. So we have conversations about race. We have conversations about the supports that our students need who are navigating poverty. We have conversations about how to support our LGBTQ plus kids. We have conversations about where do we need to provide the resources so that all kids have access. And so I'm really proud of that work. And I'm also proud to be part of a community that supports public education. I know that I'm fortunate to be a part of this school system in that regard. And I know my kids are also have benefited from that, starting here in kindergarten and now being in high school. So it's a community that really supports the work, and it allows us to really focus the resources where needed so that all of our kids can succeed. I think you can see that in our outcomes around graduation, how those have continued to rise, and those have continued to rise and improve for our student groups that have historically been marginalized in the public school system. So I know that's longer than a minute in responding to that question, but I think that's really what we're about.
Sami, I'll move to you and more on a political level because at the end of the day, you run for elected office, you're in an elective office. I know you pay attention to the political landscape. If you were looking at the public good and health of our society as a democracy, what needs to happen in education that's not happening?
Exactly what Ryan said, access. It's basically making sure everybody in our community gets not equal access, but get the access to the resources that they need to progress in the ways that will make them better and make them aspire to be the best of themselves. I think the best analogy that I would think to answer your question, what's missing, is thinking critically about the systems that we inherited. As educational system, and as much as it is as any other system in the nation, there are systemic inequities and systemic challenges in the world, and including in our schools. And I say I agree with Ryan. Our school system here and our community is supportive of public education, and they say to their board and to their teachers, make sure that we're attending to those needs. Make sure that you transform and adapt to the changes where we're addressing the needs of our children. So to answer your question, I'll give you a very quick analogy. There is a story that's called The Giving Tree, and there is a little bit of an extension about this story, not the story itself, but just imagine a giving tree, and that's our educational system. And imagine that it's tilted, okay? Where some kids from one side, they get access to that tree easier. From the other side, they need to take a ladder to get to those resources. And we've been working hard on really making sure we're giving the resources for our children, those who need the ladder because they have been disadvantaged where they are in relation to the tree, in relation to our educational systems. We give them the resources because we inherited a tilted tree. One thing I remember from my elementary school in Saudi Arabia, I studied abroad, and there was a story of the Al-Shajara al-Mi'wajja, which is the story of the tilted tree. And the bottom line of the story is the parent is telling his kiddo, this ancient tree that's been tilted for decades cannot be adjusted. It's not going to be easy to adjust it and straighten it up. If you want to have a tree that's fair and that's straight up, you need to make sure you do that while it's young. And to bring this analogy home on our educational system, what we're missing right now, and which is an opportunity for us at this time, we're rebuilding so many of our systems. Just imagine how many systems Ryan and his team are creating from scratch. How many protocols and ways of communication, ways of intervention we're starting from the beginning of saying, how can we build this system from the beginning? Of course, we're continuing our core values. Students still need to learn, need to do arithmetic and do the basic thinking skills. But the systems that we're rebuilding right now, we have the opportunity to have that tree straight up, fair for every student. So think about individualized learning. I'm thinking now that we could have every student have a way for themselves where there is an individualized pathway for them to learn. So everybody gets access to that. And our special needs students, when they get their individualized learning plans, now that becomes a standard for everyone else. I'm not saying that this is going to happen tomorrow, but I'm thinking 10 years from now, we will have this situation where it is not normal, it is the standard that no matter if you're Arabi, Latina, students with disabilities, English learner, you have not equal access, but you have equal opportunity to grow. And the system itself and the environment and the community itself is not going to be an obstacle just because of your identity. I think that's what we need.
When you say not necessarily equal access and just a yes or no answer, what you mean is the students that are in more need would require therefore more resource, and that's where you put the resources. The student that's going to do great no matter where they are, they're going to get resources, but the student that really it needs to be met at a higher level, you put more resources. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly.
Okay,
So
good.
Let's say if you're
I think we get it, and
you got the message.
You've given a good, clear answer, and I appreciate that.
Thank
Okay, the next three questions I promise are simpler, but just quite important. We have a viewer that is wondering, well, okay, what's going to happen with Head Start? I don't know if the district's involved in Head Start or not. Forgive my lack of knowledge in that. So wants to know about Head Start. We have another viewer that would like to find out about what is going on with drama programs and the like. And another one that is suggesting, could there be outdoor learning opportunities? So Ryan, I'm going to go to you. And why don't we start with outdoor learning opportunities?
Yeah, I think that we've had a lot of suggestions and ideas about how to account for the virus and bringing kids back together. As you think about that with the number of students that we have district-wide, that may not be the best option for us. But at the same time, what we've thought about has been in the future, if we're able to bring smaller groups of kids back, what would that look like? What would that environment be? So yeah, I've heard that scenario and that suggestion, but I think about it in terms of grand scale, about nearly 7,000 kids, the challenges of that. At the same time, knowing that as we move along, opportunities to bring smaller groups of kids in or to school, we're thinking about all sorts of scenarios that may work. Do you want me to move on to the Head Start question? Or
yeah, I mean, I don't even know what the district's involvement is. So if you could just kind of, quick thumbnail of that, and then what's going on there.
Yeah, so in the past we have had several Head Start classrooms in 3 of our schools. For this upcoming year, I know that there's been conversations about other locations for those programs. Again, recognizing for us, it's about it comes down to space and when we can bring kids back to school. The initial guidance was that we could have about half a class of students per day, so about 14 students in a classroom. And to do that, it really was requiring us to account for all the spaces available to us. And so I know there's been conversations with Head Start about other locations for the fall. I don't know where they have landed on those sites or locations, but that's the conversation that we were having, recognizing the capacity issues if we're bringing back cohorts or small groups of 14 students. Again, at this point, at least after October 19th.
Okay, and then what's going on with drama, teaching drama, and the like? How does that happen in a virtual environment?
So we've had conversations about a number of classes like drama. Other examples are band and choir. And so some of those classes are going to be going virtually. So I'm sure you've probably seen some of those YouTube clips or clips elsewhere of choirs that come together in formats like Zoom. And so some of those pieces are going to be happening in this way. I'm not sure what level the question is about, but I know our instructors have been thinking about how to make it work even in these unique formats.
Okay, and then I'm going to direct this question to both of you. I will again start with Ryan. Sorry to pick on you, Ryan, but then I'm going to
That's
move
okay.
right over to Sami. The district has the district's history curriculum over the years has been criticized for not teaching students about the role of people of color in American history. And also the district has been criticized for its Holocaust education, and frankly, specifically by one of our reporters, I believe last year, Jay Sharp, reporting for The Advocate, but also then through the Jewish community. So what's being done at the district in general, and then specifically during the pandemic, in terms of Holocaust education and also the role of people of color in American history? I'll start with you, Ryan.
Thanks. So we have gone through a comprehensive review of our history curriculum. We've worked with, we have a group of parents of color that come and meet with us, and we've looked at some of our curricular offerings and said that this isn't representative of who we are as a community and who we are as a nation. You know, in our school district, we have over 50 languages spoken. So students coming to us from homes that speak over 50 languages. A third of our students are students of color. And so as you think about what sorts of curricular offerings we have in terms of the staff we have in our district, where do our students see individuals that look like them and have similar lived experiences? That's important to us to account for in our curriculums. And so we started by meeting with parents, and then over the last year and a half with our social studies teachers, we actually had a group of community members, including Sami, and at the time, Lauren was a school board member, a Latina, who came and met with staff to talk about those materials. And so we've gone through an adoption process this last year. And so I think you'll see that we've made advances there. And it was obviously more than, it was really important to make those changes that should have been made in the past.
And then what about Holocaust education?
Yeah, so that's a component that's been looked at as well. So looking at all those pieces of history and recognizing again that it is not just the perspective of one group of people, and really looking at what are those pieces for all of our communities. So I think again we've advanced in that area over the last year.
Now, what's been done in terms of textbook review? I know at the fifth grade level, most egregiously, years ago, it was my, it was my opinion, it was egregious, so I'll say that. There was a textbook in the district for fifth graders that talked about Hitler as just simply not liking the Jews. That was it. What's been done to remedy Holocaust education? Is there going to be more taught? Are there books and materials being added? Is footage of what happened being added?
So in that case, there are about 3 questions in there. So in terms of adoptions, what happens, generally speaking, is we look at curricular areas, and every year you do a new adoption for an area. So one year it might be language arts, one year it may be math, one year it may be science. And what we've started to do is we started to look at those materials and through an equity lens. So looking at who is represented in these materials, whose voices are heard, because you can do that in any content area. It doesn't have to just be in social studies. It can be in language arts. It can be in science. Not all of our great scientists were men, and white men who may look like me. And so it's a piece of every adoption that we make needs to have recognize the cultural relevance, and also the cultural relevance for our kids. So one of our board goals is around recruiting racially and linguistically diverse staff. We have our dual language schools that are taught in Spanish and English. And so we want our kids to see themselves and be represented in our schools in a variety of ways. And it's an area that we continue to focus on and work on
So
because we know
anything been
there's work to
added for the
do.
next, anything been added since last year for Holocaust education?
Yeah, so social studies is that area. The specific materials is something I can share with you for sure. I off the top of my head, I can't name them specifically, but I know that that work has been done.
So things have been added.
Yeah,
Okay, great.
yeah,
And then yeah, if you could send that over at some point in the next week, that'd be
Mhm.
great.
Yeah, happy.
We love reporting when something's changed in a positive way.
Yeah, happy to.
Yeah, okay, great. Thank you for that. And then Sami, I know that you may have specific you come from a different set of experience, of course.
Hmm.
So please, how would you respond? Um, how would you respond?
I think Ryan spoke to this really clearly, and the work always continues. As a board, we are the students of the community and the district. We're learning from our staff, from our students' voice about what needs to be done. The board expressed a huge interest in racial justice and racial equity work, that we need to make sure that we are intentional about this work. We're including, sorry, Ryan, maybe you're unmuted. Where we want to, is this better? Perfect. So we want to make, we want to make sure that the students of color and students from different lived experiences and historical events that are important for racial justice, including the Holocaust, needs to be front and center. One thing I really appreciate in the district's work is that we're inviting the community to provide feedback, inviting students to provide feedback, and also the board is going to be intentional about racial justice and racial equity, and how can we be anti-racist in our curriculum, in our systems, and our policies. And that means that we are intentional to reverse the inequities and challenges that we've seen in the past centuries. So I believe Ryan said right. We are proud of the work that we're doing. There's progress, and the board is continuing to learn and take the leadership on making sure that equity and justice, especially racial, is front and center. And probably, sorry if I may add, if you have the time.
Of course.
My lived experience, one thing I valued is I came from a different, I was born here, of course, I need to put that there, but I lived in Saudi Arabia as a minority, a religious minority there. It gave me a unique experience where I know that the traditions and the even the way you read the scripture or you pray in your family is different from what is officially provided at the time by the public school. And that's not okay. That's a challenge for the students as they grow. And I know that was easy for me because not all identities are the same in the challenge they face. So there's no way I can relate to what it means to be Black in the United States of America. And I know that we have to have a curriculum that is informed by the lived experiences for our students. Each one of them is unique, and especially the racial inequities that we had in our history and other inequities needs to be addressed in a way that is mindful, and we make sure that we reverse them in our schools.
Okay, and before we move to the last question, and it will be the last question, I want to comment that we have a viewer that commented in social media that their experience with district food personnel, at least at the elementary and middle school levels, has been that if a parent reaches out and talks to them, they will work with that family really quite specifically, and that her experience has been quite positive. So I thought the two of you may want to know that Always nice to be able to get towards the end on a positive note.
And I'll make sure that Sharon Gibson knows that. I'll provide her with that feedback. So thank you.
Yeah, it's always good to hear that from a viewer. Okay.
Thanks for sharing.
Okay, and then this, yeah, great, and thank you, viewer. Then the next question, really the last question, I'm going to direct it to both of you, but and I'll start with Sami, and I'll move to Ryan, which is essentially this: folks are not going to be in a classroom at least for 6 weeks, quite potentially longer. Um, what is lost in terms of the learning experience? For me, as a moderator, I'm accustomed to being in a live room. I can read the audience and know if I'm asking a question in a way that's just not working. I get that immediate feedback in front of a camera. I have no idea. What is being lost in the learning experience for students? And then also in a kind of that social dynamic that goes with going to school together with folks of one's age, and being out in the world away from the family. Could we reflect a moment on what is to some extent being lost at the moment? Not that it can be avoided, but there are some losses there. And I would like to go to you first, Sami.
Yeah, I'm glad that you let the wiser person goes after. So I want to say there's a lot is going to be lost. I teach at the university level for mainly first year college students, and some of them are struggling with COVID in their family and themselves, and still they want to pass their classes. And unless they know about the support system that's available for them in the institution and the community, they're going to be left out. I have a student who's doing programming. Can you imagine programming? He's learning programming, and he needs to drive 30 minutes to download, upload, make an appointment with me for office hours, and drive back 30 minutes just to connect with the internet. That's his only way to do it. So those stories let me reflect on my own professional experience as an educator and as a policymaker, think of what could be lost and reflect on the recession. After the recession, it was not only the educational outcomes, but also health outcomes, mental health outcomes. And I worry that this could be a challenge. How can we make sure that our students go out of this pandemic stronger than they entered it? And by stronger, we need to be mindful. What does that mean? Intuitively, it might mean they need to get all A's. And don't get me wrong, my dad used to say, "What's up with that B plus?" So I get it. We need to push our kids to do better and always do as much as they could. I have a brother who's a senior who's trying to take 22 credits hours, and I think there's a tendency for juniors and seniors in college and high school is just take as much as possible because I don't have anything else to do. And I want to caution here is that it's not only educational attainment that really matters. It matters. It's important. But also what matters is that you come out of this knowing how to be resilient in a situation where the community and the industry and everything around you will be completely different. The job requirements for a senior graduate in a few years will be something I can't even describe right now or imagine. Because that's the reality of nature. So I think what would be lost depends on how we are mindful about this. It could be educational outcomes that are important and relevant. It could be some grades and some things that are important, but they should not and never be on the expense of the health outcomes. Our kids feel that they belong. When they reflect on this to their grandkids and they tell them what happened in 2020, they say, well, I was hanging out with my parents more, and I was able to know my dad and mom or my grandpa much better. And here's the trip that we took. And I know not every parent is having the luxury of the time and the resources to give their kids everything. But let's make sure that we are aware of that. the metric or the measurement of what we need to gain and what we will lose is not one dimension. And we need to really think about what really matters. It's our sense of belonging, that no child right now who is left in their home with maybe their siblings or by themselves for months, no one of them feels that they're alone. So if you're a child or you're a parent listening to me right now, I hope you feel that, and you feel that we can do better in terms of feeling connected and getting the resources we need. And definitely, we will progress to the next grade. We will graduate. We will get that job or that college or that technical degree, whatever you want to do in the future. And you will have a plan. But right now, make sure that you're okay. Make sure people around you are being taken care of. I think that's how I would think about it.
Thank you, Sami. And I'd like to go ahead and Ryan, again, the question is, with folks being online only, learning remotely, what is being lost in that experience, both in terms of learning and just the social growth of individuals as young people? Ryan.
Yeah, I would say that our kids are really sacrificing a lot in this pandemic, and I think about it for kids who have needs that we're able to meet on the school site that are more challenging for us to meet right now with kids being remote. I think about the friendships that kids have, the experiences of the whole educational experience, from extracurriculars to the question we had around theater tonight. There's a lot of things that look different. I think that this is our best approximation. And at the same time, we know that when we are not able to be together face to face, that there's a component that's lost. And so I think it would be remiss of me to say our system is going to be able to do all those things well. I think we're working to develop a system that does those things, but not in the way that we have when we have relationship with one another, when we're together, when we have those individual interactions with our teachers, when we have those opportunities to have lunch with our peers, and when we have the opportunity just to have that human relationship. And so I think that there's some efficiencies that come right now in having systems like this. And at the same time, there is definitely some loss. And I know that for our teachers, I just want to, recognize our staff across the district and how hard they're working to do all those things in this format for our kids, because they know how important that is. And at the same time, this isn't what they had anticipated being a part of when they decided to work for the Corval School District. So I'm appreciative of the work that they've done. And at the same time, I know that the work that they've done looks different for kids than what kids are accustomed to. And there is some loss in that. At the same time, I think there is some opportunity, and we just have to utilize and capitalize on that where we can.
Thank you, Ryan, and thank you, Sami. I know that
Thank you.
Your days have to be incredibly long right now. So I very much appreciate your participation this evening. I want to also, of course, point out to our viewers that these evenings are made possible by First Alternative Natural Foods Co-op that I forgot to mention earlier, as well as Peak Sports, again, I forgot to mention earlier. And of course, subscribers like yourselves, if you're not subscribing, please consider doing so. Again, thank you so much after a long day spending your time with us, Ryan and Sami. And with that, Kara.
Thank you, Steve. So yes, of course, thank you to the panel for participating tonight. Also, a big thank you to the Corvallis Advocate staff who do all the behind-the-scenes work that make these events possible. And then, as Steve said, thank you to our supporters, Peak Sports and First Alternative Natural Foods Co-op. Please join us next week when we host Corvallis' new police chief, Nick Hurley. With that, the City Speak is adjourned. Good night.